This is Ori, everybody.
Hello.
He is the owner of Burlap and Barrel and the co-founder, and he is going to answer all our questions and then some today.
To answer your question, Ori, I cook Thai and Indian and British, and I married somebody who, to impress me one night, spent all night roasting spices to make his own garam masala and ruined a perfectly good pan in doing so when he put it on the grill.
That's love.
So I tend not to use much salt because it's just not that great for you. I mean, I use a little bit, but I use a lot of smoked paprika, turmeric, cumin, coriander. Started using za'atar a little bit more.
Nice.
A couple of different flavored peppers, but
Yeah.
I have never gone as far as to roast my spices.
Well,
And
neither
I
have
do buy
I.
them already. I do buy them already ground up.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. Nice. Mara, you have to answer the question also.
Oh, I'm getting lots of people who say they don't have the link.
She's on administration duty. She's
Yeah, I'm
making
on
sure that
the,
people
so I cook all the time. I have like 70 spices. I love playing with my spices. I do roast them sometimes I don't. I've got whole and ground and a little bit of everything.
Do you
Yeah.
change out your spices after a year or 18 months or 2 years or a decade?
No. I use the things that I use the most, I go through in that amount of time.
Yeah.
There are other things that, like, you know, my fenugreek or however you pronounce that is
Excuse me.
old.
Yeah. Yeah, a
But-
lot of people that have been clearing out like houses that their parents or grandparents used to live in end up finding spices from before they were born. So it's it's not an uncommon occurrence.
My mother has a box of Passover spices.
Yeah. From that when did she start her collection?
Well, maybe the zip code has 2 numbers, but only for 1 or 2 of the less common spices.
So what are Passover spices?
Yeah, what does she have in there?
These are so that she doesn't get any chametz in her
Oh, I see.
in her tin of ground cinnamon.
That's dedication.
But they have no flavor anymore
Yeah.
Right.
because she only pulls them out for,
Once a year.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Have you heard the term shelfie? Kind of like, it's like a take on selfie, but you ask people to like take of their pantry so we ask that a lot of our customers to just kind of say, hey, and the variety of ways that people store and consume and organize their spices is really, it feels like that's a reflection of everyone's personality. If you look into their spice cabinet, I think you can learn a lot about people in that way.
Uh-oh.
What's the best way to store spices?
So I'll tell you, there are 2 schools of thought on this. Like one school of thought is that like heat and light and moisture is the enemy of spices. So in general, everybody agrees, don't store your spices in your refrigerator or your freezer, just because you bring them in and out, all that stuff. It's like the formula for moisture buildup, and that can really reduce quality quickly. What I recommend is to just keep a couple jars of spices, like buy your salt and pepper on your stove, because if they're within arm's reach and they're near you, use them. If they're kind of like out of sight, out of mind in the corner of your kitchen with no light and no moisture and no heat, you just kind of forget about them. It ends up being this kind of long-term storage thing. So most people really keep their spices forever. A lot of spices have been on a very long journey to get to you. And I would argue already have lost their best years of flavor are already behind them. But we'll talk about all that stuff. But I can give intro whenever you want.
right now. I don't know if other people are coming in, but everyone who texted me is now in. So we apologize for the inconvenience. And everybody, this is Ori. He is the founder and owner and whatever, all guru of he and his partner for Burlap and Barrel. And I found them when they started selling their spices on Harvey, which is a CSA type of thing. And when I went and read their website, I was fascinated. And so I asked Ori to come and talk to us this evening. And you guys can ask as many questions as you want, do what you need to do. And Ori is all ready for you.
Well, that's wonderful. And yeah, like Mara said, like happy to keep this as a kind of conversation, Q&A, all this and that. A little bit about me. Like I'm the co-founder of Burlap and Barrel. It's me and one of my very good friends, Ethan. Ethan's kind of the chef sourcing side of all that stuff. I tag along on all the trips because it's fun and interesting. We're going to Vietnam next week just to meet. We bring in a lot of peppercorns and cinnamon and all that stuff. But in general, we're a single origin spice company. And what that means is that we work with single farmers, cooperatives, or just farmer groups to kind of bring in spices into the US. And we're a public benefit corporation. So we are a social enterprise. And so our whole philosophy is how can we add more value at origin? How can we keep more money in the hands of the farmers rather than going through intermediaries all along? So we work with our partner farmers. We help set them up to be exporters. And that's everything from saying, don't just sell us the raw spices, dry them, sort them, clean them, grind them, prepare them for export. We help register them with the FDA. We help kind of get them ready for all of that. And there's a really big difference. Normally, like organic fair trade turmeric in India, the cost is about $1 a kilogram. And we pay our farmers around $5 a kilogram. So we're trying to turn this model on its head of spices just being commodities, all spices are the same, and saying, you know what, we care about where our coffee and tea and chocolate comes from. We like to go to farmers markets, we go to butchers, like this whole idea of traceable food and food coming from a short and transparent supply chain really does translate back into quality. So let's do that to our spices too. And let's start cleaning out and treating them as actually agricultural products. And so that's our business. We're in our 6th year. We have about, I don't know, we have a ton of reviews on our site. We work also with high-end restaurants. So, you know, a lot of the 3 Michelin star restaurants work with us. We work also with Chopped and Dig In and some of the restaurant chains, but really most of our business is home cooks. So if it's okay with you, feel free to interrupt me with questions or throw stuff in the chat or all that stuff. We'll talk about all kinds of things, but I'd love to just share a little bit about my story and kind of my connection to this and kind of how this business came about. And then we'll go deep into all the spices. So first of all, who knows here? What type of, what cinnamon, what is it? Where does it come from? What was that?
Tree bark?
Yes, correct. Nice work. So cinnamon is the bark of a tree. And so basically cinnamon trees will be grown anywhere from like 5 years plus. And then at some point the tree is taken down. The wood is used for firewood and furniture and all that stuff. The bark is removed from the tree and then shaved down. And that's what's ground into cinnamon, is a dried tree bark. Peppercorns, how do peppercorns grow? So like, right, this common ubiquitous spice that we have, peppercorns are a climbing vine. And they grow in bunches like grapes, and peppercorn is the fruit of this climbing vine, and the outside crinkled skin is almost like the raisin, right? It's like what a raisin is to a grape. You have this crinkled, and the inside pit is a small, spicy, white kind of pit in the middle, and that's where we get our kind of heat from. And so our whole mission at Burlap and Barrel is to kind of create a much shorter connection between the farmer and the person using the spices, and make sure that the kind of money also makes it all the way back to the farmers and allows them to kind of grow organically, regeneratively, sustainably, and build long-term healthy relationships with them. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question? You talked about peppercorn. So first of all, my first question is, it doesn't have anything to do with like the vegetable pepper.
Correct.
And then the other question is about the difference between red and black and white peppercorns, and do they grow differently and are they flavored differently?
Yeah, totally. The spice world is full of misnomers and confusing things. So chili peppers are one variety of a plant. It's a whole genus. And so chili peppers, like all the same peppers, are bell peppers, jalapenos, the like crazy Carolina Reaper, super hots, they're all part of the same family. And those peppers, what they all have in common is that this kind of like, right, the general, like the inside seeds, the wall, some is thick, some is thin, spices, all changes. And that's because it's an incredibly versatile plant that grows really well almost anywhere you place it. It'll adapt. And that's why you get all the different variations of heat, of size, of thickness, of all that stuff. And anyway, chili peppers are native to Central and South America, and yet the most famous peppers that we know are smoked paprika from Spain and Hungarian paprika, and those were brought back by Christopher Columbus. So they're relatively recent in terms of the evolution of most of the plants and all that stuff. Peppercorns are kind of a climbing vine, and kind of they grow in bunches like grapes. And the biggest difference with that is even that is confusing. So if you've ever seen pink peppercorns, those aren't peppercorns. They're a different type. They're the fruit of a like a tree that looks like a tree. Like it really is a thick thing. It's not this vine. And so pink peppercorns, Szechuan peppercorns, Sancho peppers, any of those are also called peppers or peppercorns, but they're of a different family. And that's why there's not a lot of heat to the pink peppercorns, because they're a totally different plant. But the biggest difference is there's black peppercorns and white peppercorns. In general, those are the big ones. And black ones, you can dry them. They can be kind of a little bit red. They can be called red or purple peppercorns if they're fully ripe. But the biggest thing is that white peppercorns are the peppercorn, but without the skin on it. So what they'll do is they'll soak the fresh fruit and then they'll kind of rub the skin off. And then what ends up happening is you get this white peppercorn. And in European cuisine, it is a clean heat to it. And it started with European and primarily French chefs saying, I don't want black specks in my white cream sauces. No, thank you. And so they figured out a way of removing the black skin off of the peppercorns before they're actually dried. And that's what was used in French cuisine. In Asian, and specifically Southeast Asian, you might come across fermented white peppercorns. And literally what they do, Indonesia is famous for this. They take the fresh peppercorns, they put them in a sack, they throw it in the bottom of a slow moving river for 2 weeks. And what ends up happening is it just starts fermenting. And you get this like funky, cheesy, all that stuff, that whole flavor. And then what they do is they wash it. They wash basically the rotting fruit off and then dry it. And you get this really beautiful kind of funky, stinky cheese kind of a thing. Green peppercorns, I see a question in the chat. So sometimes those are the kind of like fresh young peppercorns that could be even like shade dried or something. The peppercorns, they start green, and as they ripen, they go yellow and pink and red and purple. And then they almost always dry to black. So green peppercorns are sometimes pickled peppercorns that use a lot in Thai cuisine. If you've ever had a dish that has that kind of, like almost like dreadlocks of like peppercorns on there. But also green peppercorns can be dried through some process to prevent them from darkening. And so you can get some green peppercorns on the market, but it's a whole world of stuff out there. One other just kind of side story that I wanted to mention, I recently went to Hungary. We're meeting with our Hungarian paprika partner farmer there, which we haven't launched a paprika yet, but Hungarian paprika is known from being kind of this sweet paprika, paprikash and goulash and all those dishes. And I know from my dad that my grandfather and great-grandfather's family would go to Szeged for synagogue there. And so they lived a little bit further south, but they would take the drive on any major holidays, for major shopping, for all kinds of stuff like that. They'd go up to Szeged. And I got to go to the Szeged synagogue over there and to kind of take a look and see and like visit it and see this is where my grandfather was. And so I wanted to just show you a couple of photos here. If you can see my screen, this is the synagogue.
Wow.
And so this is inside. You can see it's so grand, it's so big and over the top. But what was really interesting is if you look in the stained glass, what you can see here is cloves. These are whole cloves that are here on growing on the vine, which is often used in the Havdalah ceremony when you're smelling the spices, often clove heavy. And even on the side here, there were all these kind of bundles of like peppercorn plants and ginger flowers, and that was based on some Purim cake recipe that we saw. And so it's just really interesting to see how kind of spices and kind of Judaism, how much that's been infused into our foods and what we do of just finding these tiny little details. We know about pomegranates, we know about so many other kind of Jewish fruits and the challah, but I'd never seen spices play a major role to be important enough to put into the stained glass at a major synagogue. Okay, so to just jump into it really quickly, most of your spices, where do they come from? So spices typically grow in tropical and subtropical areas all around the world. That's what a lot of them have in common, you know, and America as a result grows very few spices. So almost everything is imported in here for us. And often what's different from spices from other fruits and vegetables and all that stuff is that if you go to a spice farm, you're kind of visiting a wild jungle. It's almost like a form of agroforestry, which with a lot of our best partner farmers, all they're doing is taking care of a wild patch of the forest. And so in Guatemala, you're hiking up the hills and up the mountains. There's very little machine labor and animal labor involved. So much of it is done by hand. And that's where a lot of the cost of spices come from, because that you just can't industrialize spices in the same way that you can industrialize corn or wheat or rice or any of those other things like that. And so they're grown all around the world. And the reason why coffee and tea and chocolate, we know more about, and we know more about wine, is also because it's so centralized. If you want to know about wine, you got to understand grapes really well. But for us to be able to give you the story about where spices come from, we need to do it for cloves that grow. We bring them in from Pemba, a northern island in Zanzibar that's famous for really high like flavor and essential oil cloves. We bring in our cardamom from Guatemala, where it's not even native to, but is the largest cardamom industry in the world because India doesn't export any cardamom. So a bunch of German farmers that were growing coffee decided to try cardamom, and lo and behold, it took off. And now it's a massive industry over in that country. To Vietnam, where we bring in peppercorns and our royal cinnamon and all of that. And so it's really about saying, wait, spices are not just one thing. It's not a coffee bean. It's not a grape. It's not that. And yes, there's a lot of nuance within those categories. But even then, we need to understand how is saffron harvested, how to do it right versus turmeric. And so it's taken us a long time to do that. And we've been around for a little bit more than 5 years. My co-founder, Ethan, we've been long time friends. We had an ice cream business, an activist ice cream cart in New York in 2010, where we had flavors inspired political movements and revolutions, and we donated our profits to charity. So we, for a long time, been playing around this idea of a social enterprise, of an activist enterprise, of how do we both like do business, but in doing business, we support the people along the way. So just like thinking about not this, like, how do we extract the most profits and cut costs and all this and that, but how do we build kind of healthy long-term relationships? And that's the same thing. We went from being the smallest customer of so many of our partner farmers to being their largest customers in just 5 years. And so Ethan, my co-founder, was working in fine dining restaurants in New York. I knew him through friends. I was hanging out anytime he was working and on the other side of the bar, eating and drinking. And we became good friends, and we ended up starting this ice cream business. After that, he went and got his master's degree in international development in London, and then moved to Afghanistan as an aid worker, and to Jordan, also worked there with Doctors Without Borders. And he was cooking and doing all kinds of stuff. And he started bringing back all kinds of incredible spices, primarily the wild mountain cumin that we bring in from northern Afghanistan. And his chef friends started saying, oh my God, this is so good. Can we buy this? And he said, I don't know. And I had spent after the ice cream bit, I started in advertising and marketing and want to understand how business works. I ended up starting a mortgage company of all things. A few investors came and said, hey, we want to start a thing in the US. We don't know. Anyway, I ended up starting a mortgage company. We ran that for 4 years and tried to change the way mortgages are done. And mortgages changed the way our company was in business. So we ended up, after 4 years, we raised money. We ended up selling the company. Some investors got some of their money back. I said, I don't want to do this crazy venture-backed, aggressive growth business. And that's when Ethan kind of came back to me and said, hey, I've been talking to some farmers. There's this vertically integrated cardamom farmer in Guatemala. There's this organic cooperative in Zanzibar. There's this but is there a business here? And we decided to kind of bring the band back together to say, hey, let's just extend the same idea around coffee and tea and chocolate, how we think about so much of our other food. Let's decommoditize it. Let's make it special. Let's make it valuable. And because we pay our partner farmers more, and because we ask them to they own more of the process, we are the importer. Spices come directly to us. So the result is, because we have a direct relationship, because we're direct trade, because we pay more, we get access to the most incredible spices in the world. And we're slowly starting to push change across the whole spice supply chain, because normally farmers sell to somebody with a pickup truck, who sells to somebody with a warehouse, who sells to somebody with a drying facility, who sells to somebody with a grinding facility, who sells to somebody with an export facility, and so on and so on. But you get lots aggregated up and up and up. And then in the US, any company here pretty much is buying from somebody that's buying from these massive aggregators, and they're breaking it down. So they're buying maybe 10,000 kilograms and they're selling it in 25 kilogram sacks. Then that person is packing 25 kilogram sacks into jars. And then so it's just like, it ladders up and then it ladders back down. And as a result, when Costco does a lot of their supplier audits, Costco is very, very diligent with their supplier audits, but they just can't do much in the way of spices because every time they say, where are these peppercorns from? Eric says, I don't know. 5 countries? I don't like, there's just no traceability. There's none of that. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're building here. And last year we brought in 200,000 pounds of spices. So we're still tiny in the grand scheme of things, but larger enough that we can't do it out of my co-founder's living room anymore. And also I think his wife would probably divorce him if we even asked. But that's what we've been doing now for many years. Yeah. From the time a spice is harvested, how soon does it reach you? So typically what we end up doing, one of the things that our farmers have asked us to do is to say, hey, keep ordering and help us know further ahead of time. So often we put a down payment even before the harvest or right as the harvest is beginning, we're already going to pay them 30, 50% of what we owe them. It's hard for us as a business to do these like really long times of paying way before we get the product, but it's really important for the farmers. And that's one way that we change the model that we do. We want to treat them as long-term partners. And so typically the spice will be harvested and dried. And then right then and there, we put on an airplane or on a boat and it comes to us. So it's usually just within a couple of months of it being harvested. The issue with the big spice companies is that it could be years just because it takes so many steps. It gets stuck in a warehouse, good and bad is mixed together. So what's different with us is that we have a direct relationship with one-to-one with the farmers. So there's a very small amount of time from the harvest to when it gets to us. And then number 2 is we're working with farmers who are exceptional. And the commodity market doesn't care. They pay the same price for everything. And so we instead work with those exceptional farmers to get really unique varietals and really tasty things. And just to give you like a quick, example here, like this smoked paprika that we have, this is a smoked Pimanton paprika. So this is grown in Spain where they carefully, grow the paprika peppers, and every single farm in there has a kind of smoking facility because that's their method of preserving it that they actually learned. Christopher Columbus literally brought it over and brought like the methods, and that's how it was being in Central America, being kind of stored. And so what they do is they have these 2-floor houses where on the bottom floor there's like a campfire-sized fire of oak wood. The top floor has a slatted floor with space in between the slats, and they put in 2,000 pounds of whole fresh paprika peppers there and smoke them for 2 weeks. Using a giant shovels, like snow shovels, to flip them over. And they know that they're done by how they crinkle as they flip them over. And they do that every single day for 2 weeks. And so like there's a lot of shortcuts to flavor. A lot of smoked paprika is paprika with smoked flavor. But this is done in the classic way. This is done in the traditional way. And as a result, it just smells so good. It smells like you're like grilling anything without even trying to. And so anyways, it's just usually a matter of months of us getting the spices. And we also launch new harvest. We celebrate when the new harvest comes in and it's available. And so that's what we're really trying to do is kind of reframe spices as agricultural products. And so we grew up most of our business selling to chefs and to restaurants because one, my co-founder has a background in restaurants, could sell to chefs, and also chefs, they didn't need a lot of like hand holding. They would just smell it and they would know what to do with it. We didn't have to explain. They already had their minds racing with recipes and all that stuff. And so we started there. And that was in 2016. 2018, 2019, 50% of our revenue comes from restaurants. And then the pandemic hits. And we're a tiny company. We're just 4 full-time employees. And so we were relying on a lot of other people. So first of all, half of our revenue is gone out the door in early March. We're ready. Like, how many days do we have? When are we going to be out of business? What's going to happen? We work with one packing facility that takes our spices in a clean room and fills jars with them. And we work with one fulfillment centers that every time orders come in, they're just shipping out orders all day long because my co-founder and I live in New York City and nobody has room for anything. I don't know. We don't have room barely for our own stuff in our apartments. And so we're ready to shut down the business because we don't know what's going to happen. And if any of these things break, we're out of business. But what ended up happening is by the end of May, we had more than made up for the business that we had lost from the restaurants. And then by the end of the year, we ended up growing 5x our business. Because what was happening, everybody was cooking at home. And right, by the time you got all your paper towels and your rice and you froze 10 pounds of meat and you did all that stuff, you were like, oh my God, I don't have anything to cook with. What do I do with this? And we saw that our sales of bay leaves and cinnamon both started correlating with people buying more beans and buying more, wheat and flour for like baked goods. And so all of a sudden, everybody's cooking at home, everybody's Googling spices, and there we are. ready to kind of take in the orders. And so my co-partner had our hair on fire for the whole year. We were repacking, we were putting spices on airplanes, we were doing all that stuff, but we survived. And in 2021, we grew even more, and we've been launching a lot more spices and filling out our lineup and meeting more chefs and seeing what they need, and then also working, meeting a lot more partner farmers all over the world. And actually, a lot of, I don't know how it was for you, but a lot of the partner farmers' kids ended up coming back home during the pandemic. And so it wasn't just us, it was also our partner farmers that had their kids living with them as a result of the pandemic. And a bunch of their kids who are more digitally savvy looked us up and said, hey, my uncle grows cinnamon in Sri Lanka. Would you want to try it? And we said, absolutely. And now we carry the Sri Lankan cinnamon quills from there. And the son of our partner farmer, Sugiri, in Indonesia said, hey, my dad grows peppercorns. Do you want some? And we said, yes. And now we have peppercorns from Indonesia. So obviously they're incredible farmers, and we go through a lot of work to send them to their own exporter. But that's how that's happened, is the high-tech kids kind of coming back home and doing some business development. What is a cinnamon quill? So it's a cinnamon stick, but the difference is that most cinnamon is kind of from this like kind of younger branches, because it can be rolled into that way. It's more malleable, while cinnamon powder is usually from the older, thicker parts of the bark. And actually, that's why cinnamon powder can be so much more intense. But anyway, cinnamon quills, the cinnamon verum, which is native to Sri Lanka, which is also better for you if you have kind of liver problems, and also it's kind of the savory cooking cinnamon. Like it's used a lot in Mexican cuisine and all of that. That one is actually like kind of like much thinner bark. And so it's almost rolled like a piece of parchment. Like it has like a million rolls inside of itself, almost like a Torah scroll, actually, now that we're talking about it. But so that's what we call them, quills, just because they're a little bit different. Good question. Do we source a spice from Israel? This is a little bit of a political answer, and I apologize, but we bring in a za'atar from Palestine. So I won't get into part of Israel, not part of Israel. I'm Israeli. I you know, have all the opinions, and I'm sure everyone in this congregation does. We really wanted to support Palestinian farmers. It's hard to be a Palestinian farmer. And what we also wanted to do, one of our big ideas for 2022 has been all around saying, okay, we work with our farmers to grow the spices, to dry them, to grind them, all that stuff. How can we do even more value at origin? How can we leave even more money in the farmer's hands? And we said, let's get them to make blends of the spices. And so what we ended up working is with a cooperative in outside of Jenin in Palestine. We now said, okay, we want you to do a za'atar blend the way you would do a za'atar blend. Because so often spice blends in the US are made by like somebody that owns a spice company in the US based on what they think. Some, you know, like it's not that connected to origin. It's somebody's idea. And so we said, hey, this is great. You're growing sumac, you're growing sesame, you're growing the za'atar leaves. Like, can you do this blend for us? And they said, absolutely. And it's so fresh, and they're blending it at origin according to their, like, you know, family traditional recipe. And it's some of the best za'atar that I've ever had in my life. So that comes kind of from Israel, but we haven't done much else. And we'd love to do more, but it's in general, that region is really good for herbs, but some of the other spices need kind of warmer, like more humid climates to really thrive in.
So if everybody comes to the blending workshop, everyone who comes is going to get a jar of the za'atar and a jar of the baharat. We bought 15 of each. So be one of those first 15 people and you will get 2 of the new blends.
And by the way, those are really fun. People cook with blends more than cook with single spices, but if you can make a fresh blend yourself and grind it, you know, it's really a world of a difference in terms of flavor. One of the other things that I really love about spices too, that we talk about spices and health. I'm not going to talk to you about reducing inflammation or anything. There are people that are more qualified than me, but just the idea that oftentimes the way we build flavor is with sugar and salt and fat, and spices just make such a more satisfying way of building flavor. I love sugar and salt and fat, but you can also kind of really, like some of our, like our royal cinnamon doesn't have sugar in it, but you'll swear that it does. Like in some of our other spices give you this like savory umami-ness that really is an awesome way to build flavor that salt doesn't quite do. So you can find yourself cutting sugar and salt and fat from dishes, or don't, or just have the best of both worlds and do it all. And one other just recommendation for anybody interested in kind of Middle Eastern cooking, one of our good friends, her name is Reem Asil. She's a kind of Arab American chef. And she's based in the Bay Area. And she's an incredible, she won awards as a baker, opened up a restaurant, all that stuff. Her book just came out like 3 weeks ago called Arabia, Arabiyya. And it's just incredible, like just the hummus recipes and baba ganoush and baklava and all that stuff. It's an incredible cookbook. So if you're interested in cooking more with sumac and za'atar and also the baharat, so that's one of the spice blends that will be included. Anyway, there's a ton of great stuff, but that's one that I just highly recommend if you want to cook a little bit more in this area. I can talk a lot more, but I also wanted to pause. Are there what other questions, or is there any other things that you'd like to talk about specifically around spices?
So last week when Rabbi Feldman was giving us sort of the long ago history, talked a lot about the Arabs, Palestinians, and Jews being some of the leaders in this spice trade. What does the spice trade look like now?
Yeah,
in
so
terms of-
the kind of original version of the spice trade was through the Silk Road, which was primarily Arab traders, and I believe there were also Jews that were also going along those roads as migratory, people in general. They were kind of bringing the world together, and it kind of culminated in Turkey, right? The grand market in Istanbul was just an incredible place. Kind of V2 of the spice trade was like kind of the Dutch East India kind of colonialization age, where like a lot of the world was explored, a lot in search of spices. And even there's a famous story that Manhattan was traded. The Dutch, I think, had, the Dutch traded Manhattan to the British for the knowledge of the Banca Islands where nutmeg was grown. So even Manhattan was involved, was a land trade involving spices for knowledge where these like really coveted nutmeg, plants were going. And so there was this kind of like colonialization. It was very violent. It was never good for the people that were natives to the areas where spices were grown. It was extractive and all that stuff. So that was kind of phase 2 of the spice world. And today it's still really opaque. So what ends up still happening is there's still a handful of massive companies that are handling a lot of the spice trade. We went to the American Spice Trading Association conference a couple of years ago, and spices are talked about the same way you talk about like oil, the same way you talk about like other like commodities like steel. Like what are the peppercorn futures? How are the harvests looking? How is never flavor, never just purely volume. And actually climate change is making it really hard. A lot of our partner farmers are seeing like irregular temperature, and it's either ruining the harvest, or like our cinnamon from Vietnam is 20-year-old cinnamon trees. Parents plant these trees for their children to harvest, right? It's this kind of sustainable regenerative way of growing. And it's literally a savings account, because the longer you can wait for the tree to grow, the more valuable the bark is. And so it really is an asset that keeps growing with you as a plant. And so if temperatures go up, they can't move their trees. Like these are not like, I think we all can kind of move a lot more easily than people that are in the agricultural system can really change and move in that way. So the spice trade hasn't changed a lot. There's not a lot of transparency in it. You still don't know where things come from. And there's so much confusion, even like chilies versus chili peppers versus peppercorns, like super confusing. And almost if you try to dig into it, it'll make your head spin, because like telecherry peppercorns, telecherry both describe a region that they come from and it's a size grade. So like a lot of this stuff is really tough, and the globalization of the industry has also made it harder for farmers, because Brazil and Vietnam are the 2 largest peppercorn growing countries in the world. If Brazil has a really good harvest, the price in Vietnam goes down, and vice versa. So farmers are kind of not only like, do you have to grow this crop, but now you have to like kind of play the market and understand like, am I going to make good money? Should I wait? Should I go? Like there's all these crazy stories of Madagascar. The government of Madagascar saying, you know what, how we're going to increase the price of vanilla? We're going to burn all of our warehouses of vanilla. Like everything we have in stock, we're going to burn it all to create scarcity. And that created an insane like fluctuation. The spices, like prices got through the roof. And then they got hit by a bunch of hurricanes and like bad weather that kind of disrupted vanilla growing. And anyway, it's just been all these really goofy global economics things. And most farmers just want to support their families, just want to do something, just want to have a livelihood in a way that's kind of predictable and relatable. And anyway, so that's a lot of where we try to also kind of stay in there. Do we help our farmers become organic? So it's a good question. There's a ton of certification around spices. And basically the issue with organic is that certified organic, most of our farmers grow organically and regeneratively. The challenge is that with organic, to get USDA certified organic, you have to have an assessor fly out to the farm. You have to do all this documentation and all these work plans and soil sampling and all these other things that oftentimes spices are grown by smallholder farmers. It's not a big deal if you're going to certify like a gigantic farm and like is the same assessors coming in once and that's all that matters. But it's just really challenging for the spice farmers across the board. So we ask them to grow organically. We pay them enough and pay them up front to be like, if you need to pay for organic manure, here, we'll put a down payment in and go for it. But really a lot of our partner farmers, they're incredible, excellent farmers on their own, and they're super savvy entrepreneurs. And so oftentimes we just say, we just want your spices, they're excellent. And we build a path for them around going through the export market to go directly to us. And so in that way, we want to pay a premium, but we want it to be the best. But it doesn't have to be certified organic because that would just cut a lot of smallholder farmers out of the playing field. And we just know, and we visit them and we talk to them and we work with them to make sure they are growing organically and kind of maintaining those standards. Somebody wanted to talk, Carol, want to talk about salt. Okay, salt, 2 types of salt overall. One is ocean salt, which is literally like where people will come in, and Jacobson Salt in Oregon actually does this, where they have literally like a tube going into the ocean next to where their factory is on the west coast of Portland, of Oregon. And then they filter the water and they give it a big boiling in these gigantic cauldrons. And then they give it a very slow boiling all the way at the end. And that's where the salt crystals form. If you boil salt really, really slowly, that's where the salt crystals end up forming in these like really cool, complex patterns. And so the good thing about ocean salt is that it's clean, it's kind of unadulterated. There's almost very, very little kind of mineral content and all of that there. The downside is it's from the ocean. So we're seeing microplastics show up in more and more things around the world. And it's just the work of taking water from the ocean, cleaning it, purifying it, boiling it. But usually ocean salt, really beautiful, really delicious, really incredible, and really clean flavor. Then there's mineral salt. And so mineral salt is where the ocean used to be or where ocean water used to run. Often it's extracted from even like shale or even like drilling operations. And so basically what they do is they have like almost like salt mines, and they're going in and going to these giant places of salt. They're refining it, they're cleaning it. And in some cases, like just so like maybe this ruins the illusion a little bit, like Diamond Crystal, who everybody loves for their salts and chefs love them, they also make road salt. Like it's the same stuff. And I know that it's good and clean, but just know that we use salt for a lot of things. And in some cases, it's melting ice off of our driveways. And the same companies make the same stuff. The third way actually that's become more popular in the past couple of decades is kind of chemically made salt. And so this will be almost like lab made salt, where basically they'll be binding sodium and chloride atoms together to create salt out of 2 kind of precursors. And so that's been a kind of method, and some of the big companies do this too. And so it just is a kind of predictable lab grown all this. The mineral salt, you get kind of Himalayan salt that's pink, you get kind of lava salt, you get all these kind of crazy salts because they're kind of infused with some of the minerals from the kind of composition around it. People sometimes ask us if there's organic salt. Salt is a mineral, it's inorganic by default. So there's no such thing as organic salt. But we work with actually a really cool company. We have a few salts. One is called Kala Namak, which is a kiln fired salt from India. And basically what they do is they kind of mine the salt, and then they break it down, and they literally melt it with a few other minerals in there. And you get this really like sulfuric like smelling salt. It's really intense and kind of eggy, and vegans love it because that's how you make a good tofu scramble. And it also gives you, again, this like kind of savoriness. It's an egginess. There's no way about it, but it does add a depth of flavor to kind of dishes that need it. We also work with a father and daughter team, a company called Syracuse Salt Company, where in Syracuse, there's one of the largest deposits of salt in the shale underground and anywhere in the world. And in fact, the Syracuse Salt Museum that we went to says that Syracuse provided a strategic advantage to the North in the Civil War, because the North was able to have salt, and as a result, they were able to preserve their food in ways that the South wasn't. And so as a result, the Northern soldiers were better fed. And as a result, they said, we, Syracuse, gave them a strategic advantage in the Civil War. And so I don't know, I haven't fact checked that, but we'll go with the Salt Museum story. But what's really interesting is, so the partner kind of salt maker there, father and daughter, they bought a plot of land. They knew that there was salt somewhere down nearby. So they paid a company to drill a pipe into the ground, right in the back of where their kind of warehouses that they had access to. And the way you do it is you just keep drilling. So you keep drilling into the ground 50 feet at a time, hoping that you hit high salinity water. What does high salinity mean? The ocean is around 3.2% salt. They want 13%, 14% salt. That's us. So there's basically an underground river that's kind of running across the shale, and they're able to pull that. So they just want to hit 13, 14% salinity before they hit bedrock. Otherwise, it's game over. That's as good as it gets. So you look at land surveys, you try to figure it out and all that stuff. And so they did this at 300 feet in the ground. They found the right level of salt. They bring it out through like almost literally like a garden hose. They're a very small operation. And then they start evaporating out the water to get it to form into crystals and all that stuff. So that's our selenic crystal salt. And that's typically better for finishing dishes. So like it gives you a crunch. It gives you like a hit of salt. Don't use it for cooking. It's going to all melt. All salt that's melted is salt that's, that's infused in your foods. And in fact, cooks don't like to use kind of this like crystal salt or large grain salt, because you could finish cooking and taste your dish and be like, okay, that's perfectly salted. And then tomorrow or an hour later, when the rest of the salt is fully integrated, you're like, oh my God, who oversalted this? So like you want salt in cooking, it's usually good when it can just kind of quickly infuse and you get a good sense of it. Somebody asked about pink salt. So often it's called Himalayan pink salt. And it is mined all across under the Himalayas. There's a large shale deposit. And because of the minerals in the mountain, the salt composition ends up having a pink hue. People argue about whether there's a meaningful flavor difference between pink salt or not. What's true is that it has a different mineral composition. It has more minerals than just plain white salt. And so use it. And we like it. We don't have any of it, but that's how you get the pink hue. It's all from the minerals in it. Okay, can you talk about your different cinnamons? Yes, so we have actually two different cinnamons on our site. So there's two large generally types of cinnamons, and there's some others in between that I can talk to you about. But there's cinnamon verum, which through a very like progressive branding effort by the people who named it, true cinnamon. It is not the only true cinnamon. It is a cinnamon, but that's native to Sri Lanka. That's cinnamon that's much less sweet. That's cinnamon that's kind of more citrusy. And like it works really well in like lamb dishes. It works really well in braises. It works really well in like anytime you're cooking Mexican food that involves cinnamon. It's the cinnamon verum. It's also called Ceylon cinnamon, Ceylon. And if people have, typically people for who have like kind of liver challenges, their livers are compromised, this is a cinnamon they'll use and they'll drink and they'll eat and they'll cook with, because it doesn't have a component called coumarin, which the other type of cinnamon, cassia cinnamon, is very high in. And cassia is grown primarily in China. It's this really sweet, slightly spicy cinnamon. And that's kind of most of the cinnamon that, like, if you're thinking of like big red gum or like red hot candy, like that's the cinnamon that you're thinking of. That's the real profile of it. What we bring in is cinnamon Luroi, which is Vietnamese cinnamon. And again, Saigon cinnamon, maybe you heard of it. Why is it called Saigon cinnamon? No cinnamon grows anywhere near Saigon. It's because Saigon is where it was exported from. And it used to be cinnamon grown in central Vietnam, which is this really incredible, super sweet, pretty spicy cinnamon that is our best seller. And that was all in central Vietnam. But since then, it's been cheaper and easier to grow in northern Vietnam on the Chinese border, where they grow the cassia cinnamon, which is more traditional, isn't as intense, isn't as special, but is still sold as Saigon cinnamon. Why? Because at some point, Saigon was the port that cinnamon was exported from. And that's where the spiciness is always pretty confusing. So I'll say one more thing about cinnamon, is just that, so you have this kind of really spicy, sweet cinnamon that's really perfect for sweets and coffee and baked goods and anything else like that. And you have cinnamon verum, which still smells and tastes like cinnamon, but is much more citrusy and complex and is perfect primarily for savory dishes. And what we also did is our partner farmers in Sri Lanka have the cinnamon verum. Our partner farmers in Zanzibar also grow the cinnamon verum, but we also got them to bring us the cinnamon tree leaves. And so we learned that in Indian cuisine, a thing called Tejpata, or if it's called Indian bay leaves. They're not actually from the laurel bay tree, like the rest of the bay leaves that we're used to cooking with. They're actually from a cinnamon tree. And so we went, wait a second, cinnamon trees also have value. So we talked to our partner farmers in Zanzibar and said, listen, we'll buy them from you. Don't throw them away. Don't compost them. Dry them, pack them. And they're almost like a tropical bay leaf. I don't know. They're not as like mentholy and minty. And they're much more kind of like cinnamony and gingery and like, you know, like so I love throwing them in like a pot of rice or a pot of lentils or beans or whatever. They're really perfect in there. So that's what we have on our site. They're all worth checking out. Different colors of turmeric. Okay, so everybody like knows, like everybody's been doing turmeric lattes and golden milk lattes and all that stuff kind of taken the US by storm. Turmeric is grown in a bunch of places around the world. People say it's native to India. It's hard to tell. There's still very little definitive research around spices, especially how they've moved around the world thousands of years ago. But basically, turmeric is a rhizome, not a root. It's the rhizome because it's the kind of body of the thing that grows underground like ginger. And basically, when it's grown, there's different varietals. There's bigger, some turmeric is grown for size, and a lot of the cheaper turmeric is this kind of bigger, kind of less tasty turmeric. Some of it's grown for color. Some of it's grown for curcumin content. And curcumin is the kind of active ingredient that people say that's what reduces inflammation. If you take it with black pepper, all that stuff. So people look for curcumin content, but we bring in turmeric from different places. Most turmeric is kind of graded by how like deeply orange it is. And so generally you want a darker, more orange turmeric. And that's where there became, I mean, you may have heard of scandals of turmeric being found with lead in it. And that was because people were using lead paint to color their turmeric to be darker and heavier. And so now the government of India requires that any turmeric that's exported is tested for lead before it goes out. So it doesn't happen in the US, but now it still sometimes happens in some other countries that are not as well regulated. Anyways, so turmeric. So our main turmeric is called New Harvest Turmeric. We just talked about it because we were bringing in the fresh harvest twice a year. But our partner farmer in India, his name is Dr. Salunke, and he's a pharmacologist. And he got his PhD and said, you know what, the way that I impact food systems is by becoming a farmer. And he is doing regenerative and organically grown turmeric in a region that's just not known for it. And so it's a little bit, you know, south of Bombay. And what we ended up realizing when we visited him is that he has an entire system. So he grows without fertilizers. He lets it grow whatever he wants. He only waters it with rainwater to just kind of let it kind of get water as in an environmentally sound way. When he's harvest, he cuts the tops off and lets it cure in the ground for 2 weeks before he dries it and then takes it to the grinding facility and gets it ready. There's a huge argument in among Ayurvedic doctors whether turmeric should be having a hot wash or a cold wash. He does a cold wash to maintain the flavor. And because it spends 2 weeks curing in the ground, it has a really buttery flavor. Low quality turmeric can be really bitter. It can really taste like medicine, right? And ours is buttery and sweet and wonderful. And so it's been our main turmeric. And then when 2020 in the pandemic, we were worried that we wouldn't be able to get more turmeric from India. So we said, where else can we get great turmeric for so we can just keep the supply chains going? And basically what we were able to do is meet with our partner farmers in Vietnam. And so we brought in some turmeric from them. They call it in Vietnamese red turmeric because it's a really kind of dark orange color of turmeric. This one is excellent. We're keeping it for a limited time, but it's carroty, it's sweet, it's rich. It's really a wonderful turmeric. I don't think you necessarily need more than one turmeric in your life, but these are just two kind of good options that are different. They're both great for baking. They're both great for smoothies and all of that. And just one other point about our partner farmer in India, we were his smallest customer. Early on, we bought maybe 100 kilograms of spices from him in the first year. And then the next year we bought 300. And then the next year we bought 1,000. The next year we bought 3,000 kilograms. And so we quickly became his only export customer and his largest customer by a lot. And so then now he's training his neighbors how to grow regeneratively and organically, because what's been really cool is that he was this like wacko. He was like the community dreamer that was trying to grow spices in this totally different way. And it's harder and you get smaller harvests and the commodity market doesn't care. They'll take it, you know, whatever you give them. And so us coming in was a real validation. And now he's kind of like leading the transformation in the whole village to kind of grow turmeric in this organic way, which just makes us really happy. Blue turmeric is very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. This one's bitter. This one gives you a real bitter punch. And so we found that there was another kind of turmeric that was being grown in Vietnam, and it was called either blue turmeric or black turmeric, because it looks exactly like the rest of the turmeric, but when you crack it open, it's like neon blue inside. It really looks like it's from another planet. And so when it dries into this like kind of grayish green powder. But what it's really wonderful for is balancing sweetness. So it's great in cocktails. It's great in jams. And also there's some people that just like bitter does it for them, and they're gonna go crazy for this. It just adds a nice kind of bitter depth. Like, all the IPA lovers, all the people that want their espresso with no sugar, right? Like those people, like this is their language. And so we have that. We also won't have that for necessarily a long time because it was so new and people were struggling on how to use it. And but it's been really fun, and it's been a cool experiment. And to date, it's our most liked photo that we've ever posted on social media because it just looks like it's from outer space. What other questions? What else can we talk about around spices? Okay, black lime. So this is actually one that I think you all should really know about, because people get a little confused by it, but black lime is also called Persian lime or Omani lime. You may have seen these as whole around. It's used a lot in Iranian and Persian cuisine. It's incredible. You can also make tea out of it, a really nice tea. But basically, typically, what ends up happening is you have whole limes. They're called Persian limes or Omani limes, but it's just the same thing that we call lime. It's the main varietal of lime that we know and love. They're left out to dry in the sun. So basically what they do is they create these kind of like platforms, like these mud tables with troughs on the side. So the juices can kind of leak out and kind of just get, go away into a little river as it dries. And they basically just put them out in the sun and then kind of cover them at night. And after about 20, 25 days in the sun, they put them in a bag. They're like about 70% dried. And they close the bag, this like plastic bag, and they kind of cure inside the bag and kind of turn almost into like kind of like leather jerky. And they dry them the rest of the way. And they kind of get these kind of like hollow ping pong balls that are completely black. It's really crazy. They oxidize and that kind of turns them black. And so this is traditionally like kind of a lot, right? In kind of the Persian cuisine. What we did is we ground it into a powder. So we just saw these whole limes. They're big, they're bulky. We were going to bring some in. It was going to take up like the size of my entire apartment. We're like, we can't do this. So we ground them into a powder, and now it's a lot more versatile. So I use it a lot on toppings. Anywhere you use lemon juice or lime juice, like I put on top of hummus and beans, and it's great on seafood, right? Where you use a squeeze of lemon, but it's also really nice for sweets. So like in sugar cookies and all of that, but it's just this kind of like lemon and lime. It's kind of this like flavor enhancer. It makes your taste buds work a little harder. And it just really like amplifies flavor in food. And so that quickly became one of our best sellers. I think it's super versatile. And it also, you get to pour this like black powder on stuff. It just looks awesome. Like it ends up speckling ice creams and pastries and all that stuff in really cool ways. So black lime has quickly become one of our best sellers, and it's really easy. And I think I use it also in place of like salt in some places, because it just gives you that like kind of like enhanced flavor that I also rely often on salt to do.
Ori, where is the business going to go next? Now that, we're sort of winding down it seems to me that your website grows every day, but so, what does the future bring?
Yeah, so I think something fun that we realized took us a few years, but just for everybody to think about this, who do you think our customers are? Who do you think are the people that are buying spices online? And just answer this for yourself, or let's do a little hand raise if you feel like it. Do you think they're over 40 or under 40? So who thinks that they're over 40? And who thinks that they're under 40? Okay, do you think they're mostly male or female? Right? Male, female. Who thinks male? And who thinks female? Okay, are they in cities or outside of cities? Last one. So who thinks that they're in cities? And who thinks that they're outside of cities? So our best customers that make up most of our customers are women in their 50s and 60s that live outside of major cities. And we were flat. We didn't know. We didn't know why this. I thought a bunch of like hipsters in New York City, like me, right? That photograph their food on Instagram. I was like, that's gonna be our audience. And we saw a lot of orders from AOL email addresses and Hotmail email addresses and all that stuff. Yeah. And so
Are you selling to a lot of chefs?
we do sell to a lot of chefs, but ever since the pandemic, home cooks have been the main source of our business. 85% of our revenue comes. So we still do chefs, we still do restaurants, we still supply some spice stores and all that, but it's really home cooks. And the reason why these are our home cook people is because they're cooking 3 square meals a day. People in cities don't do that. You're not eating at home 3 times a day. They love food, and so they're super knowledgeable. So they look at like silk chili or Urfa chili or royal cinnamon, like I'll figure out what to do with that, and I know. And they don't have specialty goods stores nearby, so they take the kind of like you don't want to drive for an hour to get specialty ingredients, so you're used to ordering online. So those are our people, and we love them, and they're really nice, and they leave us good reviews. And I think everybody thinks that e-commerce revolution is going to come from Gen Z and millennials, and I think it's the women in their 50s and 60s that are really the powerhouses.
So how much are you using social media or doing like demos on YouTube and podcasts? Are you into doing that?
So we're doing a little bit of that. Honestly, my co-founder and I, that's not our strength at like standing in front of a camera and charming people, contrary to today. No, but like, we just aren't doing a lot of that. But what we're instead doing is working with a lot of journalists. We're just trying to get like chefs and journalists to be like, you want to talk about cinnamon? Let's talk about cinnamon. And through that, Bon Appetit writes about us, and Epicurious writes about us, and Savour writes about us. And we find that ends up being super influential for people that are already reading an article about spices to begin with. You've already qualified yourself to be a good customer. And so it ends up being a really good place to kind of get endorsements and things like that.
I want to say the first time I heard of you, I think was reading on an airplane, the magazine in the back pocket of the seat.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, it's got to be.
Yeah, so that's what we also are bootstrapped. Like, I don't know, like we haven't taken investment. We're not doing like Subway ads or all that. Like everything is what we can afford. And what we can afford is our time right now. So that's how we've been approaching, a lot of these conversations.
So, I'm sitting here thinking it would be really interesting to do like wine pairings based on the spices itself, not necessarily the actual food, but based on the spices.
Yeah, totally. And another thing that I also like is that people always talk, I want to cook more with spices. I'm like, just take whatever you know how to cook. Maybe it's a fried egg. Maybe it's like, a veggie rub, roasted veggies, maybe it's a barbecue thing, but like, just play around, like cut a slab of meat into 3 parts or like, do 2 eggs. Anyway, my point is that like a lot of people get intimidated by saying, if I want to learn how to cook with spices, I need to learn a whole new cuisine. And I think that just ends up being like setting the bar a little too high. So I just end up like, I'll tell you, I keep the cardamoms. We have a cardamom seed grinder, which is excellent in coffee. So I keep it next to my peppercorns. And more than once, I've accidentally ground cardamom onto my fried eggs in the morning. And you know what? It's delicious. So I've been finding out some pretty cool things by even by accident. Yeah, so also I saw Hanita asked, how does black lime compare with pickled limes? Pickled limes are super intense and super funky and super sour and tart and all that stuff. The black limes are kind of lighter and closer to like a true lime flavor. I think you'll find. Do you have recipes available? We have over 100 recipes in our we have a communities recipe section on Burlap and Barrel, and I'll just drop our link in the chat. But that's where we have our kind of community. We have over 100, or each spice page has recipes for that spice, but we're working on it. We're trying to do more, and our recipe section soon is going to be even better. Just give us a month or two and we're designing a brand new recipe section. And exotic spice challah sounds really good. That's what I'm saying. Throw some ginger in there, throw some cinnamon in there, or even if you're making raisins in there, like cook the raisin in like some like red wine and spices or something. I don't know. I think it's just really fun to kind of play around and be experimental. You almost never mess it up so bad. It's always a learning experience.
you have new collaborators on your website. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh,
about what
yes,
you're
and you
doing
asked where we're
for that?
going, and that's actually part of it. Thank you for reminding me. So I think what we've done so far is we have about 70 different spices that like, I think we've done a good job filling up our lineup of different spices. We're gonna keep finding cool new stuff, and we're like mesquite powder is like the fruit pulp powder from the mesquite, like not the wood that you smoke, but it's the fruit pulp. It's really like somewhere between vanilla and cinnamon and chocolate. It's really cool. We want to keep trying to find things that aren't traditionally considered spices and bringing them in. We're also going to do a lot more blends. So like you just may have seen, it's easy to cook with blends. People love them. They're crowd pleasers, especially when you're busy. And so we're bringing in an herbs de Provence. That's actually all herbs grown in Provence, which turns out never happens in America. Number two, we're bringing in kind of kofta baharat, which is kind of this, like it's a traditional Turkish meatball blend, but it has some chilies in it, some paprika. Anyway, it's a little bit of allspice. It's excellent. We're going to launch a 5-spice from Vietnam, and a few others. And the last thing is we're going to launch a sugar line in the next few weeks. No, months. So like we're bringing in this really incredible maple sugar from Vermont, lower glycemic index, really tasty, really interesting. We're bringing in a coconut sugar. So we're figuring that out. I think we found a really good farmer in Indonesia that we like. That's really like roasty and intense. And then we're bringing in a panela, unrefined cane sugar from Colombia that just really tastes like sugar cane juice. It's so cool and so rich. So we just realized people don't treat sugars either as agricultural products. So let's make a sugar that's worth kind of paying attention to. So that's what we're now working on, is kind of creating a lineup of sugars. So you'll see that from us maybe in the fall. Oh, you see me wearing my King Arthur t-shirt? Nice, good spot. We were at King Arthur yesterday in upstate in Vermont. And so we were visiting him yesterday, and yes, we haven't told anybody this because it hasn't happened, but our ground cardamom is going to be in the next King Arthur catalog, and they're going to be carrying our spices in their store. So we're working with them. It's a long-term relationship. It's a brand that we've admired for a very, very long time. It's something that's doing it right and talk about ingredients and origin and quality and farmer equity. So we're super excited that we're going to be launching in their store in the next couple of months, and hopefully it'll be the beginning of a really good relationship. But yeah, nice. I literally got this yesterday.
And they do an amazing bread cooking course for like a week that a couple of friends of mine have taken. So you could join in the classes.
Yeah, it's such a good idea. Anywhere that people want to learn to be better cooks, we want to be there. We were like, we told them for your school, we'll give the whole school free spices. Just like tell us what you need, because these are our people and you're a brand that just attracts such impressive cooks. So we're happy to be part of whatever they want to do.
So you don't really go into the specialty groceries like.
We're starting to. Where's everybody here located? Are you all in the same general area?
Yeah, we're all from the Pittsburgh area.
Yeah, so for example, like we have some like in Philly, we have, I can even follow up. I don't know, we must be in a couple specialty stores in Pittsburgh, but like what we do is we're trying to work through specialty retailers, because like everyone that has told us is like, if you want to get into Whole Foods, you lose money on that big time for a long time. And hopefully eventually you make money on it. So like oftentimes big groceries come with like slotting fees, which can be tens of thousands of dollars, free products, discounts, demos, plus you have to work with a distributor and a broker and a blah, 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 blah. So it's just really hard to make it in like grocery these days, but the specialty grocery stores are so good to work with. And they're people that are passionate about food, and you walk in there and the staff like can't wait to tell you about a cool new thing that came in. So we're really happy to be there. So we're in a handful, we're in De Bruno Brothers in Philly, and we're working with a few restaurants and chefs there too, but we're not everywhere yet, and we're trying to figure that out next.
Does anybody have a last question or two for Ori before we let him get on with his evening? Well, Ori, we're going to have you come and cook with us at some point, because that would be loads of fun. But we really, really appreciate you joining us today and answering questions and giving us a discount on the spices for the next 2 weeks. So next week, We will be in the Katzen kitchen. We bought not 70 spices, but we bought a whole bunch of their spices, and we're gonna open them up and smell them and taste them. And Anita's gonna bring some different foods that she spiced with different spices. And so it should be a really great session. And then the last Wednesday of the month is our blending one. And Anita's gonna talk about how you begin to think about creating your own blends. And like I said, everybody will get to take home a couple of blends. So Ori, thank you so much for joining us and telling us. And I don't think you were enthusiastic enough about your company, you know.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having and listening. I have to tell you, you don't know how many restaurants have a secret house blend. Many restaurants call it an umami blend that they put on roughly everything to create their signature flavor. So this is your chance to create your house blend, your signature flavor. But thank you for having us. We're Burlap and Barrel. Visit us. I'm Ori at Burlap and Barrel. Always happy to talk and make sure. And also, if you do end up ordering, feel free to email our customer support or email me and say, hey, I just placed an order, and I'll see if we can sneak a few extra things into your order too.
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank you for hanging out. Feel free to reach out, and happy cooking.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you again, Ori.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thanks so much, Mara and Ori. Thanks a lot. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. This was so great. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Night.